G'day folks, for a very special episode of Drinks Coach, it is part 2 of Sandra and Julian's garden in Balham, and I'm surrounded by Shiraz, and when you're surrounded by Shiraz, especially in Australia, might be a good chance to have a little bit of a sausage sizzle, eh? So, got the snags on the barb, gonna have some nice lunch, I've got a paddling pool in the corner, got the rugby later, it's gonna be beautiful. Okay, so, Shiraz. Shiraz is probably one of the most widely well-known grape varieties in the world. There was a time when if you asked people what their favourite wine was, they go, oh, I love a Shiraz. Now, Shiraz is actually a very complicated beast. As the story goes, it was Templar Knights that brought back this variety from the town of Shiraz, ironically, in the formerly known as Persia, land of Iran. They brought them back and they planted in the south of France in the northern Rhone on a hill called Cave, or Le Tain, L'Hermitage. The Cave is the name of the cooperative there. So Cave de Tain, which is one of these wines, you'll taste in a minute. But 1,000 years ago, somebody planted Syrah, as the French called it, on top of a hill. This Knights Templar built a little chapel and a hermitage in Hermitage, where he stayed for the rest of his life, kind of atoning for his sins, as it were, and getting over what must have been the most terrible sort of battle shock, the horrors that he'd seen over in the Middle East. Now, to make sure I don't burn the sausages. Nobody in Australia would appreciate this show if I've got burnt snags on the go. So, you beauty, fantastic. Okay, so. What we've got here is a whole range of different Syrahs and Shirazes, so I can explain to you in one go the variety and the diversity of what Shiraz and, as the French call it, Syrah, can do. We're going to start right at the beginning, a little glass of refreshment wine there for earlier, with this. This is Tesco's finest Swartland Shiraz. This is from South Africa, from a region which has very, very old vines, very special soils, and a very dry, arid climate, which produces really savoury, rich, spicy, dry-palated, concentrated Shiraz that ages rather well. Now, would you believe it, Tesco's have a Tesco's finest product made from the region of Swartland at £7.50 a bottle. This is only £7.50, so we're going to start here. You can't really go much cheaper than that before you're drinking wine which just comes from anywhere, right? If you saw the show about Bruce Jack a little while back, go to the CoOp, buy Bruce Jack Shiraz, and you may save yourself an extra 50p. But that's only £7, and that's delicious too. Very, very simple and straightforward, though, that it is. So, we've got a wine here, which is made from Shiraz/Syrah. It's exactly the same grape variety. The point is that the Knights Templar that planted Syrah in France, it was then that hill that James Busby, a Scottish horticulturalist who went over to Australia on the first fleet in 1788, chose to take his cuttings to plant Shiraz vines in Hunter Valley and then subsequently in the Barossa Valley. So there's only 1 degree of separation between 1,000 years ago plus vines being collected from Persia, then planted in France, and then some, whatever it is, 700-800 years later, those vines were then planted in Australia. So Shiraz and Syrah are very, very useful as an educational tool for me, because it gives me an opportunity to show people that using exactly the same biological material, the same rootstock, there's no difference in clones, it's the same thing, how different a wine can be if you plant it in different places and make it in different ways. So this wine here, let's have a look at it. Even though it's only £7.50, I'm sure this wine would age for a year or two in the bottle. It's quite chocolatey, dusting of cocoa, taste of sour plum. What's it say on the back here? Spice and pepper notes, not so much, but I can see it says blackberry, cherry and plum. There's the kind of flavours I'm getting. Ideal for barbecued sausages. Fantastic. Okay, so this is a wine which I've only just opened. It's been on the market for a while. 2020 is current release. This wine will actually get better, I think, between now and Christmas as it opens up a little bit. It's kind of all the red you really need. If you're just having a plonky red wine barbecue with your friends in the garden, or you're watching the football, there you go. Moving on, and we're coming quite along up the class ladder here. We're now in the Cave cooperative in France. I can smell the sausages are cooking. And this comes from the Cave cooperative in the town of Tain l'Hermitage, where this famous incident happened with this wonderful variety. So let's say it's where the variety was invented, in fact. So this is the Co-op, and they make extraordinarily good wine. And this wine is available in Waitrose for £13.49, I think, at the moment. And it's called Les Hautes Pavières Crozes Hermitage 2019. So the appellation where this wine comes from is called Crozes Hermitage, which is quite a large appellation, in the middle of which is this hill that we speak of, which is Tain Hermitage. And actually on the hill itself, the vines and the wines made from those vines are just called straight Hermitage. And it's one of the greatest red wines made in France, capable of aging for 50 years or more. One of the most divine wines I ever drank in my entire life was 1985, Jean-Louis Chave Hermitage, which was a stunning wine. So this is made in the local co-op the same way. I mean, it's just traditionally made. They get grapes in, they put them in a tank. You don't squeeze the grapes straight away because you need the colour of the skins of these small Shiraz grapes to really richen and create a deep violet colour in the wine. And you'll always notice with Shiraz there is a kind of a violety red to the colour. Now, what's the difference between the wine style of this and this? Well, in the northern Rhone, you have a lot of cold air coming down. There's a very famous wind called the Mistral, which comes down from the Prealps and the Rhone Alp, all the way down through the very steep valleys in the northern Rhone, through Ampuy, further down, through to Hermitage. So during the day you have smolderingly hot days. It can be 45 degrees. You're quite a long way inland, so the land really, really warms up. There's no large body of water absorbing all that heat, like it would be if it was by the coast. But then at night, this cooling breeze comes down. It can be 45 degrees and unbearable in the day, and jumper weather at night. About 7 o'clock, suddenly you get this, what we call cold air drainage. Cold air is denser than hot air, so it rolls down the Alps, gathers pace, and basically blows cold air on all the grapes. So these grapes get incredibly ripe, but it catches them before they get overripe. So you end up with wines with this cool air, which have lovely acidity and freshness, aren't crazy high in alcohol. This is 13.5%. We all know Australian Shiraz can be 15 plus in some cases. So let's have a book. This one smells fantastic. French Syrah, particularly from this area, on soils which have some granite, tends to have a smell which literally smells like when you finish grinding a peppermill. You just turn it over and smell the end of the peppermill. It has an extraordinary peppery fragrance. Also, because it's always being caught by this cold air at night, it never quite reaches the big, broad, almost kind of hearty strawberry jam flavours you get from Australian Shiraz. It gets kind of like held back. So it's very much a sour cherry character, but there's also a marginal, slightly floral character to it. I often think that Crozes Hermitage smells a little bit of lavender. And also, if the bunches have been cut and put in whole, something else happens. It's called a process called carbonic maceration, where the wines ferment within the grapes themselves, and when they burst, you produce a slightly different textured wine, much more soft. But also, there's a kind of whiff, which is really nice, of kind of smoky bacon, which I think really suits it. So if you're having sausages and you've got a wine that tastes of cherries and smoky bacon, you can't really lose, can you? Let's be honest. Okay, let's have a crack at this. God, I've got to try one of these. That is the perfect match. All's good, Emma. Right. Okay, so we've gone from quite a hot area. Swartland, by the way, is no small area. I think Swartland in terms of surface area is not dissimilar to the size of Wales. Big old place. But there are some incredible wines being made there. And to buy an inexpensive wine, not bad at all. It's £7.50. But you know what? You know, when I'm eating, I like to enjoy myself and drink something special. And it's not a special wine. This is an everyday wine, which is very competently made. This wine, actually at £13.49, tastes genuinely special already. Now, moving on to this. Thank you, Katya from Davys Wine Merchants. This wine is made by a guy who I think the very, very first ever Shiraz I ever tasted from New Zealand, particularly from the area of Hawke's Bay, where there's some very special soils which they call Gimmlett gravels, which is a very special spot indeed for Syrah lovers. I mean, if you look at Syrah and Shiraz production in New Zealand, it's very, very low. It's a few percent, but the quality that's produced there from the very best Shiraz are world class. They're right up there, and right at the top ferment, maybe top 30 Shirazes or Syrahs in the world. They have incredible vibrancy and purity and detail, and these incredible smoky, peppery characters. particularly if not planted on the regular grey wacky soils, the heavier soils, but on the Gimmlett gravel soils, you get incredible flavours. 2019 was a lovely warm year. This is Pask, aka CJ Pask, and this wine is sold in London and Davys wine merchants or online for about 15 quid, 5p change I think out of £15. So I always thought that the closest two types of Syrah in the world are very pure modern made wines from the Rhone, from the northern Rhone, from Tain Hermitage, and those from Hawke's Bay. I imagine if you draw a line to the equator in both directions, you'll find they're almost exactly the same distance away. They all seem to have exactly the same amount of sunshine and spectrum of flavour in them, the same sort of spectra of pepper and spice. Oh, it's really good. Pask has been doing this reliably. This is only 12.5% alcohol, by the way, even though it's from New Zealand. You always think the New World wines are going to be big. Just effortlessly drinkable. Lovely spice. I feel a few drops of rain coming, so we better crack on with this. Okay, so we've gone from Shiraz, regular varietal Shiraz from South Africa. We've gone for a really characterful, typical Syrah from the Northern Rhone. Now we've got a wine which absolutely tastes like it couldn't come from anywhere else, but this is a Gimmlett Gravels grown Hawke's Bay Syrah. Lovely and spicy and peppery, smell of almost nutmeg in there, a lovely tangy, almost cranberry fruit to it. Now, we're going to where I suppose our collective love affair of Shiraz came from, and this is the Barossa Valley. This wine was made with the help of Belinda Kleinig, the winemaker, one of the winemakers at the amazing team in Marks and Spencer's. And this wine's called Ebenezer and Seppeltsfield Shiraz. It's made from old vines in the Barossa Valley, near the towns of Tununga and Angaston, right in the middle of the heartland, the valley floor of where Australian Shiraz became famous. You know, the incredible wines we hear about, like Grange, Hermitage, they're all made from vineyards and fruit and old vines, which come from very, very near here. Right, okay, I think we've had enough of the old Barbie. Put these on there. Yeah, they're cooked. Okay. And what we have here is a wine which, museum vineyard, old vine vineyards in Australia are now becoming incredibly valuable. It's very, very difficult to buy grapes there for not a ton of money. These wines haven't changed in style very much. All they've done is become more refined and improved since I first started drinking them in the early 80s. And, well, I say early 80s, I did drink them from the early 80s, but I probably legally started drinking them in the late 80s. Anyway, so we've got a wine here which reminds me of certain notes that people have said to me. People have said to me, oh yeah, Barossa Valley, you can tell the Shiraz is there because there's a taste like Murray mince, like kind of buttery, creamy mince. Murray mints, for those people who don't remember them, are like Werther's Originals with a hint of mint in them. And they're kind of butter toffee, butter scotch almost. And that comes from the fact they used to traditionally use American oak barrels which were made from trees which were much more porous. So the vanilla flavour came out more readily. And they were heavily charred, so there was a kind of a candied kind of flavour to them. But also there was a hint of mint just from the general kind of situation in the Barossa, where you've got blue and red gum trees and a little bit of menthol, a little bit of eucalypt in the air, manifested itself in the wine. So Murray mince equals Barossa Shiraz was actually not a pretty close passing shot, really. What's happened to them now? The wines have become less tarry. They don't age them in oak for quite as long, so they're not as heavy going and slathered in vanilla. Now you can really see the expression of these old museum vines, and they have some really quite delicate rose hip and floral notes. Raspberry comes through. This is good wine, really good wine. This wine's about £14, so these three in the middle are all the same, really, in terms of price. So a really, really good comparison. Go out and buy them. Buy one from Waitrose, one from Davys, and one from Marks and Spencer's, and you've got a lineup of wines which are exactly the same price, but say the same thing three completely different ways. Now, I love this wine because there is a freshness to it. In the old days, some of these wines weren't that fresh. You'd almost have a glass of water with them because they were so rich and tarry and sweet. This wine's 14.5% alcohol. It's 2019, I believe. Yep, and I don't know. Wine could probably improve over the next year to 5, I would say. It's also a great segue onto the last wine, because the last wine is something that I really want to talk about with some fondness and affection. Belinda Kleinig went to a company called Langmeil. Langmeil being kind of cow German for long mile. But Langmeil is a small, perfectly formed Barossa producer right next to where my love for Australian wine started, which is the great estate of Peter Lehman. God bless him. Margaret's still alive, I believe, but Peter passed away a few years ago now. And the Swiss Hess collection owns the Peter Lehman brand, and they make extraordinary Rieslings and certain vintages of Stonewell Shiraz. In one year, 1989, a very ordinary year for South Australia in general, they won the Jimmy Watson Trophy, which is the best red wine in the whole of Australia, and it was only released in magnums, of which there's still one in my flat. Now, Langmeil is the love child or the brain of James and Paul Lindner. James and I spent some time travelling around the country when his wines were imported, when they first bought this estate. And it's wonderful to see what they've done. They employed a CEO in the name of Matt McCulloch. For those people that know the name Matt McCulloch, we're not talking about the lead singer of Echo and the Bunnymen, although it is exactly the same name, and he's not a scouse. Matt is the most amazing businessman, business driver, and has only worked for really extraordinarily good wineries. He's been very, very good at... He's either very good at picking the places to go and work, or actually, he's good at his job. So anyway, I'm just going to put these corns over here. Beauty. But Matt very kindly, because I hadn't tried the Langmeil wines for so long, they're quite hard to get in the UK in general, but they've just been rated as the 4th best winery in the whole of Australia, which is incredible when you think you've got Henschke Hill of Grace, and you've got Jim Barry the Armagh, and you've got Penfolds Grange. What is it next? I mean, it's as good. And they have beautiful protected vineyards. There was one vineyard called Orphan Bank, which was going to be turned into a load of sort of condominiums and holiday flats, and they said, no, you can't do that. These vines are over 70 years old. This is Australian heritage. So they spent a lot of money saving that vineyard, and they make a wine called Orphan Bank, which Matt very kindly has sent me. It's too precious and too nice, and in fairness, 2018, too young for me to open that wine on camera for you. I don't think I need to, because Belinda's done a great job here at 14 quid. Making wine at Langmeil, and this is a brand that Langmeil own, Ebenezer and Seppeltsfield Shiraz. But here is a couple of steps up from basic, because Langmeil has a wine called Langmeil Shiraz, and there's other issue. But this for 20 quid, so for an extra fiver, we're getting a wine which is, it's called Valley Floor, because that's where all the prize vineyards are in the Barossa. And actually, when you look at the Barossa Valley, it's not like birds tweeting and people with alpine horns and goats going, nah. No, it's a huge flat agricultural plain with walls on both sides. On one side it goes up into Eden Valley, where they have vineyards too. But here's my chance finally to try this wine from the brilliant 2018 vintage. This is Langmeil Valley Floor Shiraz, and I'm expecting for the extra fiver for this wine to be phenomenal. I mean, this is the most expensive wine here, but I specifically didn't want to choose anything over 20 quid over a score, because that's taking the mick if you're just making a few sausages on the barbecue. But oh, wow. Nice one, Paul. Beautiful wine. Paul Lindner, when he was a kid, went to the aforementioned great legend, genius of Shiraz, Peter Lehman, when he was younger, and he made a wine in his shed with his mates called Shed Red, and he gave it to Peter Lehman, as the story goes, and said, "What do you think of my wine, Mr. Lehman?" And he tasted it and went, "Son, if you can make this in a shed, you got a future." Which basically stamped him as the family winemaker forevermore. And Paul makes amazing wines. This wine smells of Murray mints, it smells of cherries and minty toffee, beautiful smell of dried heather, bracken, a little bit of dried oregano. There's a kind of an arid spice essence to it, which reminds almost like some Greek wines. And the palate, it's got so much silky mid-palate fruit. It's just so sweet with fruit, but it's not actually sugary sweet. That's a cracking wine. Mint. Red currant licorice. You know the red bootlace licorice. There's the sense of that as well. But some of the vines, I've been told the vines in this wine are anything between 9 years old and 100 years old, and you can taste that essence of some incredible deep old soul fruit in there. So that's my show. Shiraz in a nutshell. Help, I'm in a nutshell. Swartland Shiraz, $7.50. Crozes Hermitage, $13.49. Absolutely loved that wine. CJ Pask, absolute expression of exactly what I wanted it to taste like. For 15 quid, this is about as representative as of Hawke's Bay Gimmlett Shiraz as you're going to find anywhere in the world. Well done, Katya. Great job, Marks and Spencer's, for 14 quid. But if you can find it, spend the extra £5. It might be £20, £21, but that is absolutely fantastic. See you next time.